Inside of you, there's an inner God that aches to awaken, manifest, and so. My name is Victor L. Ewing Gibbons. If you ask my mother, she will call me Peanut or Man, and my father will call me Peanut Professor. And those names are very befitting as an artist, as a maker, as a thinker, because according to my mother's sort of theosophical beliefs, was that I came with a very ancient soul. She swore I came with a full beard, heavy shoulders, and wrinkles on my face. And that's very important to note because in African theology, that notion of the reoccurring soul, the ancient soul, is nothing new. And so for my father, his proclamation of me being a peanut, both in the shape of my head, but also the curiosity I have about life. And George Washington Carver taught us a lot about agriculture, but one of the beautiful things about the peanut or the legume is its ability to saturate soil that has been abused or neglected, forgotten, something that needs rest. And that's very much so a part of my practice as well. I'm a found object installation performance artist from Houston, Texas, the middle child of three. I migrated here to Chicago shortly after finishing my undergraduate studies at Fisk University, where I studied sociology and art. And since then, it has ebbed and flowed into a very complex project that I'm titling In Search of My Familiar, Dreaming South, Molasses. And this iteration or extension of the project is the culmination of my thesis study here at Columbia College Chicago in the book and paper program. And it was born out of resistance, a need for grounding. When I migrated to Chicago from the South, there were a lot of unexpected fluctuations in mood, in spirit, in knowing and unknowing. And after that first year of making and participating in the academy, I was very disenchanted. And I was in need of something to ground and center my focus. So it was around that time, after that first year, I was packing up to get ready to close my first year. In summer it began, and my grandfather asked me to assist in the family reunion and planning of the family reunion. And he sent me a compendium, a ledger that had a lot of the paraphernalia and memorabilia from my family, birth dates, death dates, certificates from sharecropping, deeds, titles, and such. And that really stirred something inside of me, because it was like I was looking for this outlet or this lens to begin to make work from. And then he gave me or gifted me this information. And one thing that was particularly interesting about that compendium or that document that was prepared by my great aunt Hattie was that there was a name in the book that had no resolution behind it. There was just an asterisk by the name Jack Gibbons, who is my great grandfather. No one knows what happened to him after the birth of my great grandfather, Solomon George Gibbons. They just know that he was there. He migrated from Arkansas and made his way to Texas, wed Nancy, and they had a son. But then shortly thereafter, he disappeared, right? And so all of these questions, as a black man, assuming my responsibility and role in society, I had questions on like, what happened, Jack? My grandfather posits that the Klan killed him. I refuse to believe that notion. Although we know that the racial tension and the climate for brown bodies at the time was very complicated, right? So I know that very well could have happened, but I decided to have my grandparents take me back to the family land. And I began excavating the material culture from the land to really investigate where and what and how may have happened to Jack. Now, I knew specifically that I was not going to find a bone or a skull that was going to lead me to some unsolved mystery. But what it did is it became a threshold for me to begin to imagine myself in that time period. The land that I began to sort of excavate belongs to my family. It's been in my family for 4 generations. It was purchased in 1891 by my great-grandparents, Lula Burleson Gibbons and Solomon George Gibbons. They were married the fall of 1891, and by 1892, they had purchased 20 acres from Lula's parent, and then they decided to purchase or sharecrop for an additional 20 to make a round number of 40 acres. And they had a mule. Now, this wasn't a gift by the government. This is something that they had to work and toil and till for. This is a very particular, interesting, and important plot of land because of its conception. A lot of America's imagination as it results to African families and African bodies in relation to land ownership, one may assume that it did or does not or did not happen. But in fact, in the 1850s and as early as the 40s, there were many of African families who began migrating in secluded places and spaces throughout the South and started setting up shop, right? Now, historians will call these places and spaces freedom colonies. And these places really afforded brown bodies the space to own not only the physical beings, the physical landscape and the buildings on the space, but also to operate without the purview of white surveillance. And this is particularly interesting because in this country, black bodies were prohibited from doing so much Africanisms that, in some ways we became sterile to some eyes closed, right? But it also becomes a place where you can let your guard down, where blackness and Africanness can sort of live unapologetically and sort of dwell for and by itself. So after my great-great-great-grandparents purchased this land, they had 7 children and subsequently built homes for each of the children on the land. There was a barber shop on the land. There was a corner store before we had 7-Elevens or Walgreens. They sort of set that up because they knew that brown bodies needed access to material goods that may have not been afforded to them in secluded sort of spaces. There was also a baptismal pool there. And my great-great-great-grandparents were very active in the church. They established a church there in East Texas, and they would often do water ritual baptisms there on the family land. So you can imagine that the land and the soil hold with it so much memory and so much energy. And as a body who's been raised in urban America, I'm particularly interested in rural spaces and what it would look like for us to exist outside of the urban ecosystem. So in many ways, this excavation and going back and returning each year, multiple times throughout the year, with my grandparents, allows me to time travel and extend my imagination to assuming what would it look like for us to be able to occupy ourselves at our fullest capacity. It was at that time that I wanted to retrace the clues or the notions or what could hint towards what happened to Jack. But along the way, I came across a home, the only sort of living structure that stands as its own, and it belongs to my great-great-great Aunt Bertha Lee Gibbons Wooten. And she was the eldest. She was the eldest daughter to the Gibbons clan. She was a teacher. My great-great-grandfather Solomon, he never allowed any of the children to work for white families. One of his sort of central tenets was that we establish this place, we have this space for you to be for yourself. So there was no domestic work or labor in that regard. He always ensured that especially the girls who went to school, that the women were cultivated in academia so that they can take and teach. And of course the males, at that time, education was through theosophy, and so church. And so a few of my uncles went that route as well. And so it's a complicated sort of simplicity in retracing heritage and land and material culture and arriving at the front doorstep of my Aunt Bertha Lee Gibbons Wooten's home, because it was in that space that I found a hand-sewn bed quilt with the likeness of Aunt Jemima patches on the front and the back, really. And I took this quilt with me back to my home in Chicago, and I started sleeping under it, right? And I was mounted by a series of dreams, and the dreams told me to continue, just to continue to pursue, to continue to ask questions. And so I've done that. And it's manifested in a really, 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 really rich conceptual, ethnographic, archival excavation process.
Let's move the water around. Welcome, give a hug to your neighbor, to your neighbor. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back.
Molasses is the title, the working title for my thesis project. It lives in a larger suite of In Search of My Familiar Dreaming South, semicolon, molasses. Molasses in particular because it's a complex substance. It is the product of a product of a product of a product. And in many ways, that's the running metaphor that I have for brown bodies, black bodies, Negro bodies in this country. That we are the product of the product of the product. But we can still be traced back to the original source. So when you extract or extrude sugar from the cane, from the stalk, when you drip off the sugar, right, and you cook that down, you get crystals. And then once you cook those crystals down one step further, you get molasses. And then if you were to take molasses a step further, you would get rum or fermented sort of spirits that are often used for libation and pouring and giving homage to the gods. But I've selected, or rather Molasses has selected itself as being this title or working title because the process of archiving or collecting this material culture from my people and then taking it and then breaking it down and decomposing it into something smaller and then taking that smaller thing into something smaller. And so that's what Molasses is. It's really about reimagining or stretching the literacy or the ways we read blackness to be multifaceted and complex, but also sweet. So at the core of the question, I'm really beckoning, what is it about blackness and being the African that makes us so damn sweet? You know, what was it about the continent that inspired nations to want to come and strip it apart and rip it apart and use this piece over here to make money here, to send this here, to this, that whole triangular trade system? Like, what was it about us that made that happen? And even yet and still, how can we cultivate that sweetness? How can we stand in that sweetness till this day? I know oftentimes the readings of the transatlantic period and the colonial era are very steeped in woo, and that tone it's heavy and it's bemoaned and it's loaded with pain. But again, what is it about us that makes things so sweet to taste? And so how can we not linger in the places of tragedy, but really use that substance of who we are, this complex substance of sweetness and sugar, to really evolve in motion past it.
pan-fried cornbread. Read a broken book. Dance in between that, there, this, and all. The housefly breaks the screen door as the baby burns the bottle. The preacher only prays in tongue. The weevil spoiled the milk. Rain falls heavy, hard, so no picking in the field. Nimble fingers pluck the needle, bleeding on the cloth. Stain, go away, and come again another day. And when you do lie in baking soda, then we'll do the trick. The milkman tugs the udder. The teacher clears the desk. Conjure woman soaks her herbs. Broken eggs in empty nests. Now thy lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. And if I die before I wake, you should never let me sleep. Embedded secrets dipped in coffee stain the fingertips. Hand to plow, solar saturation, brow heavy with the light. Forever last, always, till revelation arrives. And then there come the crows, and Granny hums as Pappy moans, 'cause yesterday came too soon. Too soon came yesterday. Eat 1 cup of open air. Drink only of the atmosphere for 7 and 2 hours. And wait for God.